There is someone in your life right now who may look like a blessing, sound like a friend, and even claim they want the best for you. But spiritually, they may be standing between you and the next season God has prepared for you. Most believers never recognize this until the damage has already been done. They keep holding on. They keep making excuses. They keep praying for restoration when God is actually creating separation. And that is why what you're about to hear today is so important. Because sometimes the greatest act of God's love is not bringing someone into your life, it's removing them. Now, before you misunderstand this message, let's make something clear. God does not call us to abandon people because they annoy us. He does not tell us to walk away because relationships become difficult. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love endures. But there are moments when God, in His wisdom and mercy, begins closing a door that you keep trying to force open. There are times when God sees what you cannot see. He sees the future. He sees the hidden motives. He sees the spiritual battles behind the scenes. And because He loves you, He starts removing certain people from your path. The problem is that many Christians mistake God's protection for rejection. They think something has gone wrong. They think they have failed. They think God has abandoned them, when in reality, God is protecting their destiny. If you've been feeling confused about a relationship, friendship, partnership, or connection in your life, stay with me until the end, because the final sign may reveal exactly what God has been trying to show you. Let's begin. One of the first signs God may be removing someone from your life is that every attempt to keep the relationship alive becomes exhausting. Think about that for a moment. There was a time when communication felt natural, conversation flowed easily, the connection felt effortless. But now, you are carrying the entire relationship. You are making all the calls, sending all the messages, making all the sacrifices, doing all the emotional work. And no matter how hard you try, it feels like you're pushing a car uphill. A woman once shared her story with me. For years, she had a close friend. They talked daily, shared prayer requests, supported each other through difficult seasons. But gradually, something changed. The friendship became one-sided. Every interaction left her drained. Every conversation felt forced. She spent years trying to restore what had been lost. Then one day during prayer, she sensed God asking a simple question. Why are you fighting to keep alive what I am allowing to die? That question changed everything. Sometimes God removes people gradually, not because He hates them, not because they are evil, but because their assignment in your life has ended. Ecclesiastes tells us there is a season for everything, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. Not every relationship is meant to last forever. Some people are seasonal, some are educational, some are transitional, and when their purpose is complete, God begins moving things forward. The danger comes when we cling to yesterday while God is calling us into tomorrow. The second sign is even harder. You begin compromising your relationship with God to maintain your relationship with them. This is where many believers get trapped because the enemy rarely sends destruction that looks dangerous. He often sends it wrapped in affection, wrapped in familiarity, wrapped in emotional attachment. You start spending less time in prayer, less time in God's Word, less time pursuing your calling. Not because you intentionally walked away from God, but because maintaining that relationship consumes your focus. It slowly pulls you away from the things that once strengthened your spirit. I remember hearing about a man who had a powerful passion for ministry. He loved serving God. People were being encouraged through his testimony. But he became involved with someone who constantly mocked his faith. At first, he ignored it. Then he started hiding parts of his spiritual life to avoid conflict. Eventually, he stopped talking about God altogether. Years later, he realized he had traded spiritual growth for emotional comfort, and it cost him dearly. The Bible asks an important question in 2 Corinthians 6:14. Do not be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. This verse is not about avoiding people who don't share our faith. Jesus spent time with sinners. He loved everyone. But it is a warning about allowing relationships to steer your direction. If someone consistently pulls you away from God instead of closer to Him, pay attention. That might not be an accident. That might be a warning. Now let's move to the third sign. This one is even harder. you begin repeatedly experiencing a loss of peace around them. This is one of the most overlooked signs Christians ignore, because many people are waiting for a dramatic sign from heaven, a vision, a prophecy, a supernatural message. But often, God speaks through peace or the absence of it. Have you ever noticed that every time you're around a certain person, your spirit feels unsettled? You can't explain it logically. Everything seems fine on the surface, yet something inside feels disturbed, anxious, heavy, uneasy. Philippians 4:7 speaks about the peace of God that guards our hearts and minds. God's peace often acts like a spiritual referee. When something is out of alignment, peace begins to disappear. A businessman once entered a partnership that seemed perfect. The numbers looked great, the opportunity looked amazing. Everyone around him encouraged him to move forward. Yet every time he prayed about it, he felt unsettled. He couldn't shake the feeling. Months later, the partnership collapsed because of hidden dishonesty. Looking back, he realized God had been warning him through a lack of peace. Many believers ignore that inner warning because they become emotionally attached. Don't make that mistake. God can see what you cannot see, and sometimes He speaks through spiritual discomfort before revealing the full truth. The fourth sign is that God begins exposing things you were previously blind to. This can be shocking because often the person hasn't changed, your eyes have. You begin noticing patterns you once ignored: manipulation, dishonesty, control, jealousy, pride, selfishness. Suddenly, things that seemed normal become impossible to overlook. Why? Because God is turning on the light, and light reveals what darkness tries to hide. Jesus said in Luke 8:17 that nothing hidden will remain concealed forever. Everything eventually comes into the light. A woman prayed for years asking God to reveal the truth about a relationship. She loved the person deeply. She wanted the relationship to work. But over time, God began revealing things she had ignored. Excuses stopped making sense. Red flags became impossible to dismiss. Patterns became undeniable. The hardest part wasn't seeing the truth. The hardest part was accepting it. Because truth often requires action, and action requires courage. Many people pray for discernment, but when God gives it to them, they don't like what they see. But discernment is a gift. It is not meant to hurt you, it is meant to protect you. And if God is revealing something repeatedly, don't ignore it. There may be a reason He keeps bringing it to your attention, because sometimes what feels like heartbreak today is actually protection for tomorrow. And what we're about to discuss next becomes even more serious, because the fifth sign reveals something many Christians never recognize until it's almost too late. The fifth sign that God may be removing someone from your life is that their influence consistently produces spiritual confusion instead of spiritual clarity. This sign is dangerous because confusion rarely arrives all at once. It creeps in slowly. At first, you begin questioning things you once knew were true. Then you start doubting convictions God clearly placed in your heart. Before long, you find yourself torn between obedience and compromise. You feel pulled in two different directions. One direction leads towards God's purpose, the other leads towards temporary comfort. The Bible tells us in 1 Corinthians 14:33 that God is not the author of confusion, but of peace. That verse doesn't mean life will always be easy. It doesn't mean you'll never face difficult decisions. But when someone consistently pulls you away from truth, consistently encourages compromise, consistently makes you second guess God's direction, something deeper may be happening. I remember hearing about a woman who felt God calling her to start a ministry serving struggling mothers. She prayed about it for months. Doors started opening, opportunities appeared, people confirmed the vision. But there was one person in her life who constantly discouraged her. Every idea was criticized, every step of faith was questioned, every opportunity was met with negativity. At first, she thought they were simply being practical, but eventually she realized something. The voice she was listening to most wasn't strengthening her faith, it was feeding her fear. Once she created healthy distance, something incredible happened. Her confidence returned, her prayer life deepened, her clarity increased. Within a year, the ministry was impacting hundreds of lives. Sometimes the loudest voice in your life is not the wisest voice, and if someone's influence consistently creates confusion, fear, and spiritual paralysis, God may be showing you that their season in your life is coming to an end. Now let's talk about the sixth sign. This one often hurts the most. God begins closing doors despite your efforts to keep them open. You pray, you try harder, you communicate better, you give second chances, then third chances, then 10th chances, yet somehow everything keeps falling apart. Conversations fail, plans collapse, opportunities disappear, distance increases, and no matter what you do, the relationship refuses to move forward. Many Christians immediately assume the enemy is attacking. Sometimes that's true, but not always. Sometimes the closed door is not the enemy's doing. Sometimes it is God's mercy. Think about Abraham and Lot. They loved each other. They traveled together. They shared history. But eventually, God allowed separation. Not because either